Good afternoon and welcome to the USAID webinar on fake news. My name is Jody Basson. I am the founder of MasterStart, and with me I've got Emmanuel Gamore. Emmanuel is the host of Unpacking Africa and is a ecosystem builder. Emmanuel, did I get that completely correct? Can you give us a bit more insight into your background?
No, absolutely. Thank you so much, Jody, and thank you for everyone who's joined in on this. Super excited to have all of you. In terms of what I do, I started a podcast, Unpacking Africa, and really having conversations that are a bit more empathetic and nuanced and navigating through the pandemic and what's going on. I do have a multimedia journalism background where I was an editor for community newspaper in Washington, D.C. Then I was also business development for a radio station and hosted my own show, YFM. So for those in Ghana and those in South Africa, similar sister station to YFM, and hosted a tech and kind of like innovation show. And then I got to work with Google and YouTube and was YouTube project manager for Ghana, and had the chance to train people on digital content and also influential management as well. And then I had a chance to teach at Africa Leadership University on entrepreneurial leadership. So yes, I think the ecosystem description speaks to the multiple roles in facilitating tech innovations, entrepreneurship, and African leadership.
Awesome, that's quite a cool description. Emmanuel, in terms of what we've seen through the media, fake news has become a very hot and debatable topic. In terms of how fake news is spread, the digital persona is one of the really critical things that we look at when we discuss fake news. Can you give us your description of what the digital persona is and give us an idea of how that digital persona is managed?
Excellent. Thanks for taking us there, Jody. I think for all of you who are listening, and for most of us within these times, we are inundated with digital. We're on social media platforms. We're consuming them, and these include Facebook, your WhatsApp, your messengers, but also YouTube and LinkedIn for multiple purposes. And typically everybody, every institution, everybody has an identity. So similarly in the real world, where you're kind of dealing with me as Emmanuel, my identity, my name, my CV, for example, on social media, everybody has a digital persona, digital person, a representation of their identification. And the way that works is you typically are the one that can start it, but for a lot of social networks, your friends, your colleagues, your institutions end up also having a representation for you. And you find out that even if you don't have an outright overt persona online, there are people who have personas that are put together by spiders, Google crawling spiders, or any of these other platforms that search information and pictures and put it together. So most of us, almost all of us, and for those who are advocates for internet and privacy, folks who put up baby pictures and others, children already, by merit of having some type of footprint, have a digital persona. So hopefully through this discussion and as you lead this, we'll be able to unpack what each person who's on here, your digital persona is, what it should be, the digital personas of organizations, because similarly as Jody, you and I have our own online personas, so do news organizations, so do specific agencies, and so do organizations that spread content, some of them being news, some of them being fictional as well. And so as we go along, hopefully we can unpack that and help you guys be empowered to tell what a digital persona looks like for yourself and for an organization.
Great. So in terms of that persona, the persona is what we really look at when we try and vet or try and check the credibility of the news that we follow. So as an individual, how do I ensure that I'm sticking to best practice to make sure that my persona isn't used in future to be utilized for fake news?
So that's a great question. I think one of the things that is helpful is when there's so much information, we all quickly rely on reputation. And for a lot of us, the way that we're able to identify vetted information is where's the source of the information coming from? So in the same way in the real world, where our parents are our initial source of information, whatever they say is golden, then the institutions of learning or your community or workplace start to share information that you trust. We also kind of give away that trust to news institutions and organizations. On the digital platform, it's kind of similar. So there's false or fake news, which some people don't necessarily agree with in terms of negative things that's put out there. There's misinformation, this information that's developing and that can change over time. And I think for all of you out here, there are a couple of ways of looking at it, but one of the true tested ways in which you can vet through and cut through fake news is by identifying the digital persona that's sharing that. And one of that is looking at whether there's reputational integrity with wherever the news is coming from. And I can be able to tell you 3 steps that help you say, okay, wait a minute. If this page does not have reputational integrity, if it's not being reshared, so 1, the original source is being clearly cited, and does it have proven reputational integrity? So for a lot of our news sites and other things, reputational integrity is they share something, and if somebody calls them out on it, they actually have an incentive to take it down, to apologize, to retract, or it's part of their job. They're incentivized either by us subscribing and paying, their shareholders paying, in order to have verified news source. So a lot of us are subscribed to your SABCs, your Al Jazeera's, your BBC's, your CNN's, your Fox News, because there is some level of accountability and front-facing office that you can go to. The second kind of model, if Jody is okay for me to go into that right now,
please do.
Excellent, is then your circle of people that you trust. So if the people that you work with are resharing, so it might not be a news platform, like maybe ETV or something else that might not have Pan-African relevance. But if I know that Jody has shared it, I trust you. So you've reshared it, other people within my network have reshared it, and it gives that news item or information validity. And I think that's actually one of the things that a lot of brands are able to do and use an influencer management. I'll speak to that a bit as well. And also just an agenda. So moving away from the digital persona, that sharing that, the trusted network of people you have who are resharing or revalidating that, and then just the message itself. A lot of times, and we learn this in journalism school and also in academia for those who are doing research or some type of thesis, in presenting your argument, you have to look for a balance. So the content that they're bringing, does the agenda kind of push you to have an emotive response, or is it something that is informative? You can kind of tell by the leading or baiting kind of narrative that they put out there.
Yeah. So when looking at an area of subject matter that's shared as news, how do we actually, validate whether that information outside of the persona is actually factual, or whether it is fake news?
Excellent. So in journalism, in the traditional sense, you have kind of an editorial committee. So before articles are put out, and maybe we can go back to like the radio days, TV days, newspaper days. Particularly for me, I was a managing editor, and you have an editorial board where you need to verify with 1 or 2 sources. The fantastic thing about social media is how instantaneous and global the audience becomes. And so what that does is it cuts through the time and opportunity to check in order to break news. And so you have a lot less tools that we've had in traditional media in order to be able to sift through what is fake, what is misinformation, and what's a developing story. So for most of us, you really have to have a funnel check. And there is disadvantages with having that, because then you kind of have a filter bubble. And online, a filter bubble, really, for those who may not know, is once you start to like a specific post or a specific account, the algorithm that does total watch time continues to feed you that specific space. So then you end up having a specific perspective. And one of the things that we all acknowledge, and for all news, there's always a perspective or lens in which folks share information, whether it's from a progressive lens, and I'd use political kind of examples in order to explain the lenses, or whether it's from a conservative lens or a liberal lens. And these lenses, newspapers and the people who work there tend to espouse that. It's just you bring yourself into what you write. And part of that is, the problem with that is, if you start to like a progressive site, the filter bubble continues to send you those. And so you end up only getting those without getting other perspectives. The real pain point is, on social media, it's incredibly difficult to distinguish well done fake news. Misinformation. Fake news is really you can look at the persona, you can look at what's being shared, you can look at the agenda that's being shared, you can look at the people around your community and reserve judgment. Misinformation is a little more tricky because it has some level of truth. And it usually starts off with a bait, and sometimes a lot of what people would call conspiracy videos and others that are thrown out there are laced with a great catchy audio, a setup that seems to catch your attention. But one of the key tricks is that it's removed from the source. So you find out that a lot of conspiracy videos, a lot of misinformation are shared on platforms like a WhatsApp or Telegram, where you can't really identify where's the true source of this. How did this become part of our narrative? And they rely heavily on what we would call like your influencers, those community of people, the people that you trust that are not close enough like family, but you kind of respect their opinion. And because they've shared it, you then that trust you've given to them individually converts to that information. So those are the ways to kind of look at it. Where's the source? Where is it coming from? What's the agenda? And then is it informing you, or rather kind of eliciting an emotional response? And those are kind of guidelines that can help you sift through a lot of fake news out there.
Yeah, so we were referring to a lot of that as the influence effect in terms of our last discussion. People that you have an impression of, and whose you feel really comfortable in sharing things that they've posted or they've shared. In terms of fake news and what is being put out there, what are a lot of the common sort of tactics which are being used by fake news agencies that we can have a look out for? Fake news has progressed quite significantly over the last couple of years, and it's actually, for a lot of these guys, it's become an art form. So what are the common tactics that they use in order for you to spread that fake news?
Excellent question. I think for those in film school, for those in J school, you find out that there's a documentary format and ways in which people share information. And these are intentional. There's quite a bit of science, same way that the science that goes into our user response and interface. How do you click something? How much time you have in order to engage somebody with short information? If you look at the very compelling fake news that's put out there, they employ quite a bit of these tactics. There's some type of subdued but engaging soundtrack in the background. They usually mimic trusted news sites. So you find out that there would probably be a news site from something that speaks to like the font and background of maybe a CNN, but there might be an extra N in there, or an Al Jazeera network, or Fox News, or MSNBC, or SABC. But also, I think for the most part, what they try to do is to get into groups. So you find out that groups of people who may have a specific opinion, somebody shares that, and without people within the group truly vetting the extent of that, they reshare it. So the tactics that they use is infiltrating communities that may share probably the leader part. So if you check it, it also happens a lot. And we had quite a bit of that situation in the mid-2000s, early 2000s, mid-2000s, where newspapers were transferring a lot of information or content online. And so then they needed really clickbaity kind of title headers in order to get you to read the meat of the article. And people would have the most ridiculous things on the title header or the leader of the article, and you'd go in and that's where they'd have all the disclaimers, like, oh no, the dog didn't bite the human being, but it's a potential thought that someone had, and here's the story that we have. And so the progression of that type of culture now has quite a number of people have these conspiracy theories embedded within there, and there's maybe a short snippet of what the person really said. A good example of that for those in this era has also been the narration around Bill Gates. And he's been a huge advocate with his Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And however you feel about him, either as a billionaire or an activist, it's been fascinating to see the type of false news and misinformation that has taken snippets of his conversation and mixed that with certain theories, and they've been reshared particularly on WhatsApp. And so later on, the first couple of things you would want to ask is, where's the original source? Can you hear the real video for what he says? Because for most of us, if you cut us short within mid-sentence, the nuance and perspective and content of what you're saying can be misused. So that's a great way to also understand the type of tools and ways in which they manipulate news, taking some elements of truth and mixing that with things that maybe not be proven, sharing them within communities of influencers. And so then an influencer you trust then shares it without probably watching the entire extent of the video or understanding the context of the primary source. And then everybody continues to reshare it because it aligns with a suspicion or it alarms you in a way. Or we're also quite excited to share new knowledge, right? Oh, I found out something new. Let me share it with my circle.
Yeah. One of the things that happened over the last couple of weeks, specifically around COVID-19, has been an increased engagement with digital platforms, with people being on lockdown. What has become more and more evident to us is the value of our digital reputation. How do we go about managing that digital reputation? Especially if you look at, there's an unclear path as to where we're going in the next couple of months. A lot of what we do will probably be conducted across digital platforms. How do I ensure that my digital reputation is managed properly so that I can progress in my field, in my career, even socially?
And that's a fantastic question. I think for a lot of us, we kind of started social media with one or two platforms. And to be fair to all of us, if you don't get this right and you're listening to me, nobody wakes up becoming an expert on all the platforms because they've evolved and changed so much over time. My first interaction with Facebook was the early days when you only could sign on with a college ID. So if you didn't have .edu email address in your domain, Facebook was not available to you because it was campus exclusive. Now it's a global network with all kinds of updates, and in each kind of year or two, they add new things to it. But for your specific persona and the way that it makes the most sense is to have consistency. And for a lot of us, we find that each of the platforms serve a different purpose. So Facebook is really for interactions, catching up with old friends right now, and a lot of parents are on it. So probably the younger generation may not be as excited as some millennials were on it. LinkedIn is more professional, where regardless of what you do, we all have the same template. It does not manipulate that. So it kind of forces you into this corporate box of expectation. Twitter, on the other hand, really is just pithy words, and it's global, and it seems to attract a lot of advocacy and strong opinions on there. And that's also because of how transient the information that's put on there. So almost by form, the form in which a platform does, it informs also the use. And the best way for most of us, in order for you to have a persona that has integrity, is consistency. Consistency on little things. The name you put up, the pictures that you put up, your bio information, the emails that you put out there. And these work for a couple of reasons. One, it tells us, your audience, that this is the person that's being represented, right? So for those of you looking at me now, if you saw any of the promotional things about this, if I came onto this and I had changed the color of my hair, for example, if I changed something that's drastic the way that I do, you would probably distrust and say, wait a minute, there's a dissonance there between what is being represented as Emmanuel and then what is being represented as the person speaking to you. And the same dissonance happens when, for example, you have a cat on your IG profile picture and you have a face of probably somebody that you love or care about, a family member, on your Facebook, and then on your LinkedIn, you probably have a picture that's not so clear with a hat on. What that does is that it allows folks who usurp and kind of like farm identities be able to manipulate that. And then nobody can really stand up for you because you didn't have a clear, consistent identity across platforms and channels. So that's one of the ways in which you can make sure that you are on top of your digital persona and integrity. Another is a lot of platforms are now becoming quite savvy. If you look at it, There are verification checkboxes for Twitter. Instagram can allow you to verify. For those of you who have a Google Knowledge Panel as well, they allow you to be able to claim your identity, right? So that means that your email addresses are quite important. We started email addresses, and some of them was like free AOL or free Yahoo. And the way that you put your Yahoo email was like Spunky Monkey and all these other creative ideas. But now these emails are latched onto us similarly to how our phone numbers are latched onto us. So thinking through a little bit what you want your email address to be, usually for social media, your main persona should be for professional use. It should be tied to your name and identity in some way, so that for verification purposes, it's quite easy to link it to you. It's much easier for you to link to my EA Gamor at whatever email address than it is for you to link me to a Spunky Monkey where I have to dispute that it is for me or it's part of my identity. So these are the ways in which the building blocks of your digital persona should definitely align and have integrity. You can have other avatars for other things that you want, and let me know if you want me to go into that, Jody. And those ones could express interest. But for most of us, because of such a heavy demand for our digital presence, if you're logging on to YouTube, if you're going online, if you're going to watch Netflix, they ask you for a primary email address. So it's quite important that you think through what you're sharing, and those building blocks help you through navigating digital and social media as well.
Great, thank you. What happens in the case where your digital persona gets hacked? What should you do in that instance?
So first of all, it's really the first thing to do is when you acknowledge you've gotten hacked is to report it to the relevant platform. What we also must understand, the business of social media, it's almost like when your house is broken into, the first thing is you want to report it to the relevant authorities. They have the platform, they can see who's logged in. A lot of platforms have become a lot more adept at looking at signing history, where your geolocation is at, and they're able to assist in that way. Second of all is, and this is quite important for those who are here, if you're on digital, you should create a digital community, people that share with your interests, profiles, and others. There are two parts of this. If it's hacked and the person is not usurping you, so usurping an account goes beyond hacking. Usurping means they've taken your profile, they're acting as if they're you, and they're sharing what may be not you. And so they might be using your integrity and credibility for nefarious activities or malpractice. And that can come back, obviously, to hurt you. In those cases, whilst the relevant platform has been reported to, or your community, or same as whilst the police is investigating, right? You need to have a community of digital people who are advocating, who are flagging these things and telling your audience, hey, this is what's gone on. Because once you're hacked, you don't have control of that primary account. If you don't have other accounts in order to navigate, then you would be depending on your community of Avengers, as I like to call them, in order to augment and support and make sure that at least your audience understands what's going on. Hacking is usually not your fault. There are ways to try and secure that, but hacking has happened to Chancellor Merkel with her phone. Hacking has happened to top executives with Jeff Bezos with billions. So there is a bit of feeling as if you've been violated and a personal kind of like intrusion when you're hacked. But the first thing is to acknowledge that it can happen to anybody. There are a couple of steps to make sure that you prevent it and create a minimal percentage of it happening. But most importantly, that you have a community of people who can advocate for you, so that immediately it happens, immediately you report it, and you're able to get back your account. A lot of what's done in a nefarious behavior does not directly affect you.
Correct. COVID-19 has had a significant change on the way that a lot of people interact with social platforms. We've seen certain celebrities move onto TikTok, for instance, because they're trying to speak to a younger audience. We've seen other influencers not actually communicate on the normal channels that they would. What do you see as the major changes outside of that that's coming around with COVID-19?
That's great. I think for those of us who love digital, it's awesome to see different voices and different people own it. I think that if you're an advocate for digital, one, we've always wanted access to internet and platforms for expression. And so the positive side of all of this is to see artists and others look at different platforms, engage with it, and share great content. I come from, again, multimedia content is king. So however folks get it to us in the best way is really cool. But I think you mentioned a bit the generational use of information. And for all of us who, luckily for me, I was trained in traditional media. So radio, newspaper, television. And what then you learn is that these are all just platforms. So the internet becomes a platform, but even more so, each of these social media applications are like almost canvas, if you will. And so for TikTok, which really is really short, creative ways, it's not narrative, it's purely entertainment. You can only go so much on a soapbox on TikTok because you have like 10 seconds, right? So it has great entertainment value. One of the things that has been interesting is just seeing how different generations navigate or get on each of the platforms. For those of us who were on Facebook, and actually more high five MySpace, if you guys were as crazy about online platforms and tech as I was, Quora and other non-popular ones. But even now for TikTok, it's kind of like a learning curve for me. And so if you're here and you're listening to any of these, if you were an early adopter of Twitter, but maybe you just have a Twitter account, if you're just figuring out Facebook and maybe WhatsApp, and then now you're hearing about Zoom, you're hearing about these other platforms, don't feel anxious and nervous at all. None of us are born being able to adapt and know how to use these. It's by practice and by use. There are quite a lot more like almost one pagers that help you understand what each platform's best use is for. Don't feel intimidated to be on all the platforms at all the times. I think there's also anxiety and internet use issues, but I'd encourage you to try. Most of these platforms have gotten so much better from the early use days. Usually if they're like one-click signups for a lot of them. And basically a lot of times once you sign up, it's really going to be you and your family members and few people anyways. So until you kind of do something that either goes viral or trends, there won't be any trolls. So don't feel intimidated to share and navigate and find your feed while you're doing that. And this goes across generations as well.
Right. As we get to the end of our discussion, if any of the attendees would like to ask Emmanuel any questions, please post these via the chat function. Emmanuel, just the last question from my side. I have my my digital persona. I've looked after it. I have a really good digital reputation. How do I start becoming an advocate for sharing verified information?
Excellent. That's a great question. I think for most people, we're passive. So until something happens to you, we kind of only engage with platforms as consumers. There's quite a high percentage of people who go on YouTube, who go on Twitter, and all they do is just take in information. And so hopefully if you were part of or heard the early part, you're not just taking in the information, you're challenging it, you're verifying it. You're doing one or two just really quick ways of researching for it. Then as you start to become a content creator, you start to get input from people. So people are like, wait, where did you get this from? How does this make sense? And that forces you a little bit to find out communities. And advocacy is on that third part, right? Where you actually go and say, hey, these are the people that I care about. So for those of us in academia, there are quite a number of kind of like handles and hashtags, and usually these hashtags are helpful because then it creates a catalog of topics and people in that area. So for those who are probably going through their dissertation, you can find so many hashtags. For those of you who love rugby and are excited about the Springboks and following, you can find a hashtag of that. Those of you who are crazy about Premier League soccer and you're a Manchester United fan, you can create your own hashtag. But then inadvertently, you're also part of the community. And the more that you contribute, the more that your voice is heard. Folks within that are able to kind of advocate for you when you share, because you're part of that. It's the same thing where you live in your workplace. When something happens, you've engaged with that community for a bit. And so Advocacy means participating, having a voice, speaking up, and then being someone that takes care of others, because when things happen digitally, the other people also step up and replicate that. And I think it's quite important, and I'll say this for WhatsApp, because WhatsApp is very near and dear to us. It's one of those applications where you don't feel like you have to go online to go on WhatsApp. You kind of have it on your phone, it's with you. And so most people wake up and it's the first thing. And because it feels like a regular text message, people are in a lot of groups, WhatsApp groups and others, and they just consume a lot of information. And those are groups that you're part of that you could probably participate and also advocate. So what you would not tolerate, for example, in a workplace, for those of us who've done diversity and inclusion, those of us who understand what it means to have a fair voice, those practices that you do in the workplace, you should also be sharing it in the WhatsApp group. And disclaimer, the first time you do that, it might be uncomfortable for everybody. Just like how when you come in orientation and they share rules, it is a little uncomfortable. But over the course of the years, you learn that the group adapts to you. Other people start to speak up. And the beautiful thing is, because you spoke up, when somebody else says something that maybe excludes you, because we're all not homogenous, there's something different about us which we should celebrate, then that advocacy you've done comes back in return to support you as well. So advocacy in groups on social media is incredibly important. It's a way that we start to build healthy behaviors. In some cases, it can lead to groupthink and group bullying. And that is a space where you need to take a step back and recognize what's going on. But by and large, advocacy has helped with many causes and helping elevate the discussion within WhatsApp besides just consuming information.
Awesome. We've got a really cool question from Daniel here. What's your opinion on infodemic that we are all currently facing now during COVID-19?
Can you please repeat that? What is that?
What's your opinion on infodemic? So it sounds like the infodemics, like pandemic.
Infodemics.
But information.
Okay.
Yeah.
Woo! So infodemics. I kind of heard it. Okay, I was like, let me make sure. Infodemics are quite interesting. I think that we, as humans, we need pithy information. And one of the things that the pandemic has done is it's a hyperbolic situation where I want to know what are the medicines I need, what is the best news as quickly as possible so I can react. And so this is a unique situation where a lot of people are churning out infographics, infodemics, as you may term it, and informationals on medical information. The real caveat, though, is medical information needs to be vetted. And unfortunately, we also live in a world where people of position of power, whether political or institutional, are sharing things that are developing stories or have not been completely verified. And so CNN reported quite recently that there was a huge population of folks in Nigeria, which is close to where I'm from, who were overdosing on chloroquine, because the news report that was being shared was chloroquine has been effective against coronavirus. The problem with these infodemics and others, it's coming so quickly. The context isn't being shared, the dosage, and that's why with things like medicine and others, you need to consult a practitioner. It's contextual. It depends on you. Your dosage may be different. That there's a lot of information that needs to happen. So yes, there's a need for us to know relevant information quickly. Be particularly careful informationals that speak to our healthcare, because they do have consequences and effects. Chloroquine, like many drugs, have side effects. And so just for you thinking that you're taking it for one reaction may cause an unintended reaction from somewhere else. So please be careful, especially when in this time where there's heightened anxiety about infodemics. That probably should be one of the things that you should vet and share. And for the parents out there who are listening, my mom is one of them. So my mom has WhatsApp. So I'm currently in Joburg. She's in Alexandria, Virginia, and she loves sharing these like stories and places all over the place. And because she's my mom, I try to go through and vet it with her. And I'm like, yes, send this. No, don't send this. And some of them, just by the leader header, I just don't even download it. But it's important for parents and others to recognize that we're all anxious. Yes, we want a solution, but please verify, because for parents and family members, whatever you share, odds are your family assumes that you've also vetted it as well. And it's okay to not know, but have a leading message. So for example, when you're in a family group and you're sharing something that says pineapple juice cures it, say, hey guys, I don't know how I feel about this. I know pineapple juice is a fruit. Maybe it might cure this, but this is what it's saying. So at least we understand your thinking. But if you just put in there, pineapple cures coronavirus, it actually doesn't give context and it doesn't allow for that engagement as well. So yes, please check for infodemics.
Great, thank you. Well, I'll just ask, can you let us know how we can differentiate between fake news and the real deal? So much fake news currently on the net. We touched on that slightly earlier, but I think, let us give you the opportunity to expand.
Excellent. So I think catching up for those who just joined as well, the most important thing is reputational integrity. The source that is sharing the news, do they have reputational integrity? If this site is sharing something that is false, can you hold them accountable? And that works with every organization. If you can hold them accountable, then odds are they're not incentivized to share what is verified for you. The second thing, so the 1, 2, 3s, the 2 is also like, for those in your close circle who are resharing it, do you have people that you trust their opinions resharing that? It might be one person, it might be a stranger, but if the folks that you trust, the people who you know are careful in their professional life are not sharing it, they may have their doubts. So that means that, wait a minute, this source of information might not be verified. If you're the only one in the room championing this new medicinal or this new advocating for this new perspective, odds are it probably needs to be verified. And the last one, so the 3 and the 1, 2, 3 of checking fake news is the agenda. Usually by looking at the description, how it's shared, where it's shared, is it just to get an emotional reaction out of you, or is it truly to inform you? And you can tell the agenda by how people present facts. They usually try to go through and say, hey, this is what we know, but this is probably new knowledge. Hey, have you checked this out? It's more of an open-ended question. A lot of times when conspiracy kind of like messages are shared or fake news, they usually go for, oh, you must have known this, or you're so stupid, this is so new, how did you miss this? And you're like, wait a minute, are you trying to inform me? Usually they lead with an emotional reaction, then a logical debate or argument in order to inform you. So these are the 1, 2, 3 ways for you to quickly look at about 90% of news to be able to differentiate.
Great, thank you. We have a really great question from Kimberly Lisa. Looking to the future, more and more AI deepfake videos are on the rise. Popular example is fake Obama interview. With this being so realistic, do you think the same fact-checking methods you mentioned before will we need an entirely new approach?
That's a great question. And I think there's been a lot around deep AI manipulation. And unfortunately, before I came on this, so for the United States President, President Trump has a campaign video that he's tagged on his Twitter, and you guys can see that. And on that, there are like 4 or 5 African-American men in a couch, and there's a TV ad of Joe Biden playing, and there's a clearly kind of juxtaposed image of former President Obama on an image of another person. And current President Trump has that running as a campaign ad and on his official Twitter ad channel. And so it is a huge thing. There's a lot of gray areas that politics cross. There's a lot of gray areas that artificial intelligence is allowing and manipulation is allowing to happen. Some of these type of battles are fought on the platform level. So Facebook and others were brought into a congressional hearing in order to speak about what the platform itself allows. For those of you who may post quite often, Twitter and Facebook have tried very hard in order to kind of move away from political taints. If you do have a political post yourself, there probably might be a response that says, hey, this is political. We're flagging this. If you think that it still should be shared publicly, you can dispute or you can ask for a resolution. So platforms are taking kind of a couple of steps, but really it's up to us. So the good question is, yes, we're behind. It's almost like the technology comes before we realize the full use and the misuse. And so for a lot of us, it was kind of like a university that put out the opportunities for AI to manipulate these videos and juxtapose these false interviews. But we need to advocate for that. So the community advocation that I talked about is really important. We need to speak to the platforms because that's where the money is. If we say that your platform is allowing these things to be misinformed in others, and you need to allow personas that are verified and trusted on your platform, then that's how you can actually tackle these type of big issues. But great question.
Awesome. I have one last question for you from Isaac. Situations and conditions surrounding people always change. How do you change your digital image or persona without looking fake or basically unauthentic?
Excellent question. Authenticity is everything. But the truth is we grow. And as human beings, we have your goals and the way you want it. I would suggest you having like a notepad, a clear sheet of paper that you look at and say, hey, just as a human being, you have goals and aspirations. How do I list for my digital persona? I want to be able to explore new things some more. I want to be able to share new things. I want to be able to aspire for either a new hobby, new skills. These are ways that help you as an individual and your audience prepare to appreciate that. Don't be afraid of sharing your journey on there. I think after a while, nobody just wants to hear your sound bites. So don't be intimidated the same way that you grow and progress as a person. Share that on digital as well.
Awesome. Emmanuel, thank you so much for your time and answering all of our questions. We'll be back tomorrow covering creative intelligence. We hope you all join us. Please, everyone, keep safe, and we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I really hope you guys learned a lot from this, and we'll speak to you guys hopefully soon.
Super. Goodbye.